In the last episode, we discussed EHS audits in the APAC region, speaking with experts from Singapore, China, and New Zealand. In this episode, we turn our attention to another part of the world, hearing from 3 EHS audit experts in Europe and the US. They dive into the role of auditors as helpers and educators, and the opportunity to leverage auditors to improve business outcomes. For our panel discussion today, I'm excited to be joined by Lauren Corbett-Noon, Senior Consultant, Antena Group USA, Robert Suschwinkler, CEO and founder of Denspert in Hungary, and Dr. Roland Langmuhn, Senior Consultant and Partner at Baden Consulting in Switzerland. Lauren has over 15 years of environmental, health, safety, and sustainability experience associated with industrial and commercial industries. Robert has over 15 years of experience in sustainability, ESG, and environmental health and safety. He leads Denspert, a leading provider of EHS and ESG software solutions, as CEO and founder. Roland has over 30 years of environmental health and safety experience. He has extensive audit experience and has conducted and managed global EHS management systems, as well as compliance audits for clients across industries. Thanks so much for making the time to jump into this today. Really look forward to connecting with you. Let's just start with something easy, and I'll just rotate around and popcorn to each person. Can you explain the work you do in EHS audits? How does this bring value back to your clients, and why is this important? I'll let ladies go first and start with Lauren.
All right. Thank you, Phil. Well, for starters, I've been working in environment, health and safety and sustainability consulting for going on 20 years. And one of the key elements that I learned very early in my career is that our clients want to ensure that they're doing the right thing, whether it is from a regulatory perspective or even doing right by their customers or their clients. And one of the ways that they have historically ensured that is by conducting an audit of some sort. It might be an environment, health or safety compliance audit. It may be a risk assessment of some sort. It may be a gap assessment, a gap analysis. I could go on and on what they're called, but our clients do like to validate and ensure that they are doing the right thing for not only their employees, but also for the planet.
That makes a lot of sense. How do they define, or how do we currently define, like, the boundaries of the right thing, or how might that changed over time?
It definitely changes over time. What we see often is that it's more based on a business's or a client's risk and their risk tolerance. Do they want to follow the letter of the law and also do best practices? Or do they simply want to do something that's a little bit more checkbox, which is not a bad thing. Sometimes it's based on budgetary constraints. Sometimes it's based on what their stakeholders are asking or suggesting.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks so much for sharing. I'm going to go to Roland and just ask, is your work any different in terms of the definition of value or doing the right thing?
I think the work is more or less the same. The basis could sometimes be a little different. I usually start with a list of legislations which we have to fulfill, the company has to fulfill, before I go out and visit the company. I usually keep in mind actually also best solutions, things I've seen with other companies. I usually, if I can transfer some of the knowledge, it's for me very important, because to being an auditor, we see lots of different solutions for the same thing. And sometimes we can, if it's not a competitor, we can transfer of knowledge and thereby have some additional advantage of having an external auditor. What I see as important when we're doing the audit is, after the audit, have an action list with due dates. So the company knows what is important, what they have to do, and by when. So they get some sort of able to track it. When doing legal audit, it's our experience that we always find things which haven't been fulfilled, which needs to be improved. No company, or nearly no company, is perfect. There's no failures or things which need to improve.
It makes sense that you would find gaps and that you would create action lists with due dates by seeing all these different companies and by being up on top of what the latest and greatest is in terms of the knowledge in the industry. You're able to bring that to clients. So I want to go to Robert and ask the same question. Is there anything different in your work in terms of definition of doing the right thing or how you add value to clients where you are?
Yeah. So we are digitalizing a lot of the audits, helping clients to have it digitally. So we have a quite structured look at what's happening in what region. So what's different with Europe, Asia, Americas. If we step one back, I think EHS audit and also ESG audit has a very unique approach because EHS and ESG people, they are multidisciplinary. So it means they have to talk with people who have nothing to do with environment, health and safety topics. You're talking with a technician guy, you're talking with a financial guy, you're talking with a business guy, and you have to explain to them why is health and safety important, why are environmental topics dangerous, what opportunities you could have in this field. And this they don't know. So you have to choose a language what they can understand. You have to choose an approach so you can get to them. That's, I think, one important element. Second one is people should understand that audits shouldn't be scary. So it's not like an exam. Also, still you have audits where people, they say, oh, the auditor is coming. And, you see, Lauren is a nice consultant. I know she's not biting your head off. So auditors typically not that kind of person. And you have different kinds of audits. So if you look at, you have an ISO certification audit or an ESG CSRD audit, which is very structured, very standardized. And then you have audits like what my colleagues are typically doing, where you're going to the site and try to help them, trying to find risks, trying to find opportunities, what you could help the client to reduce the risks and finding savings, finding those things, what could be in future something what you don't want to have. And I think it's very valuable. And you have your own internal audits where you are as a company's EHS manager or EHS colleague going around and helping. And this is again something where you should understand that you are a partner of the company's organization and you want to help people to find those things what are not working as they should be. And of course, and this is interesting, what I find companies are more scared of is if the mother company, so the headquarters, is auditing you. They're not scared about the ISO audits. They're scared about the mother companies coming to us because if they find something that could impact my work very much, my budgets, my perception within the organization. So what I see is, and I'm really curious what the others are thinking, is that if someone from the headquarters is coming and the headquarters tells me, let's check, then that's the one where they are the most concerned because their outreach is quite big in that case.
I worked quite a bit as an auditor from the headquarters. That was a while where it was really appreciated. EHS audit, risk assessment and lockout, tagout. I was on power station where we had electricity, we have steam, we have heat, we have everything, fall from heights, everything. And there I really could contribute and from the head office to communicate their problems.
And that's a very good company culture. I think it's very important to point out. If you have this, I think that's good. And I forgot one, is supply chain audit, I think coming more and more. And that's also quite risky because you could lose a contract if they find something. So your contractor is finding something what they can't accept based on their procurement process. And that's also something what companies are quite scared of. But it should be like this, what you're mentioning, Roland. I totally agree. So if you have the culture, if you're prepared, then this is an opportunity and not a risk you shouldn't be scared of.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of folks talk about the risks. And I'm sure when you're explaining this to them, the reason for the audits or this possible impact of the audits, the risk comes up first. But once you explain it to people, how do clients see the value coming back? Where do people see the opportunity to get better, to deliver more value, or to maybe even grow their business because of doing these things?
Risk and people falling from height, which have experienced, or other things where you are actually people with fatality. You need in an organization just one fatality, and everybody in the organization knows that risk assessment. And we did a fault risk assessment. Then it's very, very appreciable, and everybody knows that this is important for us to know it and to be able to really reduce it. And first identify all the risks and then reduce them. You can reduce it by probability or severity, and there are two different approaches to reduce risks.
That's very clear. I'm curious what sort of benefits the organization might have found from identifying a problem like that and fixing it. Do any of you have examples of times where people identified the risk? And minimizing the risk is a good thing because, we don't want people to get hurt. In previous episodes, we described environmental health and safety as someone coming home from work in the same or better condition as when they left, right? But there are other benefits, I would speculate, because people are not afraid of falling, or people can move faster, or you find some more efficiency gains. Have you seen other benefits from identifying some of these risks and actually turning them into opportunities for growth?
We're starting to see a little bit more of an aging workforce in some of our manufacturing sites, and that institutional knowledge that isn't necessarily passed on, or is passed on in maybe a potentially skewed manner. This is the way we've always done it. And then we have newer practitioners in these, whether it's a warehouse, a manufacturing site, maybe it's data centers we're seeing are popping up, and there's not necessarily in some of those areas, there isn't that institutional knowledge. And if they're not asking the questions, which they might not even know the questions, the correct or the appropriate questions to ask, they may, by mistake, not be following the proper requirements. One of the things that we're seeing here in the US, we're seeing a lot of data centers, as I mentioned. We're seeing a lot of warehouse and distribution centers. And I think sometimes we look at those two specific examples and think there's not a lot of risk there. And there actually is. Warehouse and distribution centers, depending on a certain industry code, you are required to have stormwater permit, as an example. It's not uncommon for us to see warehouse and distribution centers that may not, maybe because they never have, maybe because, they're not doing a heavy manufacturing. So they look at their process and they think, how am I impacting the environment? I'm just moving material in and out of this building into a truck, and not necessarily realizing and recognizing that there are some of these risks, whether it's environmental or health and safety, that actually do apply to their operations and to their business. And so I go back to something that I said earlier about whether it's called an audit or an assessment. Sometimes we have clients that just ask us, can you come in and tell me what requirements apply to me? What am I supposed to be doing? And just that question alone, I think whether it's coming at the facility level or from the corporate level, it's really showing that positive initiative. It's showing I want to do the right thing. And even if I'm not doing the right thing right now, I'm trying to get there. And so we'll see whether it is corporate or it is a regulator recognizing that the right thing is trying to be done. And then it does, again, it builds that relationship and makes the process much nicer because, again, we're trying to do the right thing.
One thing that hit me as you were talking, Lauren, is that transfer of institutional knowledge challenge. And it seems like you might have the opportunity, because you have to make the transfer of institutional knowledge, to actually bring in new standards or elevate standards in a way that's a little less frictionless, because people are often we've always done it this way. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, then maybe resistant. But if they know that they need to make some changes because of personnel or because of something new, that transfer of institutional knowledge gives the opportunity to break habits and traditions. Is that a pretty fair conclusion?
I would say that's a very fair conclusion. And I would say something that we shouldn't overlook in any of this is that management of change. We often think of a management of change process as being, maybe it's a change in our operations. Maybe we're adding a conveyor. Maybe we're adding a line to our processing, our site. That management of change should also be occurring, when we're, changing job roles, when we're changing assignments. And that management of change is a very important part, may not necessarily of the audit process, but it helps that entire process. It plays directly into it.
And Robert, that seems to kind of tie into what you were talking about, this being multidisciplinary, right? If we're talking about new equipment, new roles, new assignments, new departments, that kind of goes across all sorts of functions of business when you're thinking about EHS. So I'm just going to switch it to you. Is there anything you would add to what Lauren and Roland have already said?
Yeah, I think there are two very important points. One is what you're mentioning. If change is happening, change means you have to adapt. For example, a new law is coming. Typically, auditors like to check what changed recently from a legal point of view or from a process point of view as a best practice in the industry. So they're checking it. Did you adapt it as a best practice? And this is not that you're not compliant. In many cases, it just tells you, because as auditors saw a lot of organizations, and with this best practice, it's what you saw in these organizations, you can give them some advice. How could you be more effective? How could you do it better? How could you even reduce your risk even more than what you have now? And I think that's a great opportunity. Other one is that for older legislations or organizations who are doing things longer, they have a cultural bias, like a cultural preconception. This is how we do things here. And an auditor can bring in very good, like a fresh perspective to the organization's way of doing things. And I think this is something what companies forget. So if you hear something during an audit that this is how we do things here, then that's something where the auditor, the light flashes and okay, let's go deeper on that rabbit hole.
One of the things we've heard consistently is that there is that organizational cultural bias, but there's also the regional versus international, the local versus the global biases. Can you just amplify a little bit about how regional and local understanding is important in the context of this work, especially when you have to contrast it against some of the multinational challenges?
Yeah. So it depends again what we're talking about. If you're talking about legal structures in Europe, like mainland Europe, you have very strict and defined regulations. So it tells you what you have to do, how you have to do. If you take some UK or American kind of legislations, which define a high level expectation. So you have a bigger movement there, but the risk is, I think, also higher. So what is expected is defined on a higher level, not that detailed, because in Europe, it tells you when, what you have to check, how you have to check, and what you have to provide. In US, we have guidelines, but it's less formulated in that sense, but it goes deeper into a strategic kind of thinking, how it's defining, and it's not changing that much. In Europe, easily, in a year, you could have changes of 50 laws, what you have to adapt. But they tell you what you have to do, which is easier probably for organizations. And if you're a global head of an organization, just imagine how confusing this can be. And we're not talking about Africa in some countries where it's still in PDF and there's no website you can get updates and other things. Or in Asia, they're also quite special, culturally biased by the nation itself, how they handle it. And how can you manage this from headquarters? So then you need local expertise. You have to trust your people that they can deliver locally, or you get a good auditor who can help you locally with the local knowledge and give you feedback. That's a big challenge for global organizations to handle in all the countries, all the changes continuously. And parallel, you have the health and safety risks, what you have to reduce. You have environmental risks you have to reduce. Find the opportunities, what you have. And now, to mess up everything, you have ESG, which is coming top down, and environmental social governance. Your management is pushing, your investors are pushing, that you are focusing on a lot of other topics from social welfare, employee relationships, leadership, governance topics, which is, I think, a huge challenge for organizations, but it's the way we are and the way we are heading. Because EHS, ESG becomes mainstream for companies. It's not anymore something operational, do something and we don't care at management. Management cares. Health and safety, COVID, if you remember what was during COVID, health and safety guys were the heroes of the organizations to make sure business is continuing. With ESG, with all this climate change and then all the other problems where ESG is like an answer how organization could act to that. You are in the mainstream as a ESG professional, EHS professional, and the audits become more important. It becomes more business related and you're more in focus. And the auditor has a very important role in this process.
That's pretty amazing and a pretty expansive role of the auditor in ESG beyond, I think, where it has been in the past. Lauren, is there anything you would add to that comment?
Yes. There's a few things that I do want to add. A couple of points that Rowie had said. So thinking about the role of the auditor, and I want to go back to something that I also said earlier about communication and just doing the right thing. By the role of the auditor, typically, or at least our approach is to help educate the facilities, help educate those local personnel, whether we are coming in because corporate has asked us to, or, maybe a supplier or somebody else has asked us to come in. We really take the approach and our role is there to help. So we encourage the facility level practitioners and personnel to ask us questions. We are here to help you and guide you. But they need to be open with us. They need to share with us what their process is. And how that ties into something that Rowie said is that we're seeing a lot of corporate level or stakeholders pushing down or developing strategies and goals, whether it's for waste reduction, water reduction, energy reduction. And what we're hearing from the facility level personnel is that they're having these goals pushed down to them, and they didn't have any part in helping develop them. They don't know how they're going to reduce their waste. They're getting tasked to support this without a means of being able to do that, or without having the knowledge, or maybe they don't have enough time in their day to support that. So one of the other items that I'd like to add back to that communication piece is that if you're part of building those goals or that strategy, or it's being pushed onto, is really continue to ask the questions, ask for support, ask for help, ask the whys, because it will also, maybe there's a goal that has been set that might be unachievable for a number of reasons. Maybe it's the way your process lines are managed. Maybe it's, a cultural thing. Who knows? There could be a variety of reasons, but to continue to keep those lines of communication open, I think will help solve and make everyone's lives a little bit easier.
Maybe if I can add to that, because I really love that you are an educator to organization. We got a call from an Austrian client, head of global EHS, and they have a production site in India. They got contacted locally. They have more than 3,000 people in India. So they found out that there's a requirement in India that they have to do a kindergarten because they're so big. They said, we are production site. They pushed it to EHS, solve it somehow. So the EHS now had the role of making a kindergarten, and the head was totally upset. Why should I do a kindergarten in India? Because I have 3,000 people. They couldn't understand it. So we could contact our partner India. They said, yeah, we know about it. Let us help you how you can solve this, because there's solutions for everything. And I think this is where you as an auditor, if you have this relationship, not only about the day when you're auditing, it's also in between, that you have someone who knows you and you can reach out if you get something which is great for you, and in Austria, they wouldn't think about it to create a kindergarten. In India, it's a little bit different. There are challenges what you wouldn't find in Europe in many cases.
Regarding international clients and audits in other countries, as part of Inogen, we try wherever possible to use our local partners to do the audit. That's very, very important, and it's essential because the local partners know the local legislations. However, I have had customers who are required people from Europe or America to go to their sites in certain countries. It's in Africa and Far East, especially where sometimes they have difficulties with having their local auditors from that country accepted in the population, and where customers are asking for somebody outside the country to come in and do the audits.
Super. So, Roland, on the legal side, where it seems like you spend a lot of time, I think that people perceive the legal as being a hammer. And, Lauren and Robert have talked about the auditor being an educator and being a helper. Is that the similar perspective that you have and that you're able to deliver with clients, or are people really get concerned about the legal risk?
For me, it's very important to be the helper. That we help the customer, the clients, and really making sure that his view on legislation is the right one. My view on legislation is, of course, what I know for myself, but also experiences which we have from other customers who have a certain view and some legislation and how they solve this legislation. And this is essential to transfer this knowledge to our customers.
I'm sure that once they get started and realize that you're there to help as opposed to punish them, that they open up a little bit, or I would surely hope so, and take the opportunity to improve. So I want to end with one more quick question. And the question is, what is the most important or exciting regulatory or legal change that you see in the market right now that can really help clients?
Well, I think we'll probably all talk a little bit about CSRD, some directives that are coming out of Europe. And I think what I might do, if it's okay, is just give an example that's a little bit more related to supply chain. And it's not necessarily a legal requirement, but we have a client, they have a supply chain that is doing their manufacturing, and their supply chain had a SMETA audit, which is a similar for a comparable, like an ISO, it's a standard. And what they are doing for their customer, their client, again, their supply chain, is helping them close their audit findings. And when they approached us to say, could you help our supply chain, our manufacturing site, close these findings, we kind of said, why are you doing this? This is not your business. This is, part of your supply chain. The response was really something special. They said, because we can afford to. We are a brand name company, and we want to help them. Their success, in their manufacturing sites, them doing the right thing, benefits us as well, and it benefits them. And so I think as we talk and hear a lot about supply chain and supply chain initiatives, I thought that this was a really nice example of an organization that was going above and beyond it in helping their supply chain in a way that they didn't have to, but they do recognize that it helps everyone. And I was really encouraged by this organization and really wanting to do that right thing.
I think it's a great example of when you're talking about embracing doing the right thing, that it wasn't particularly regulatory. It wasn't particularly PR. They weren't going to go trumpet it to the world. They just wanted to make this happen, and they knew that they could help a supplier. And that's likely going to strengthen the business, strengthen the trust and the relationship between them, and also a good example of how you can work well together to make things work well for everyone. So I think it's an excellent example. It's raised the bar a little bit for Roland, who I've got next. Roland, what do you think?
The biggest change in Switzerland for the time being is CSRD reporting. The law was actually applicable for around 200 companies, but is now in the next, I don't know exactly when it's implemented, in next 2 years or something like that, going up to 3,500 companies, which means it's expanding, even though lots of companies are doing it on voluntary, because they all see this is the way it's moving. They know the law is coming. Let's start and be prepared till it's implemented. That's the biggest change going on for the time being.
Yes, not only in the EU, but there are ripple effects in Asia and Europe. We covered that in other shows, and we're seeing it in the media. So it's a pretty interesting time and an exciting opportunity. Thanks, Roland. Robert, you want to bring us home?
Yeah, I will be boring or repeating, but I agree with the CSRD. But what I want to bring in is from an audit perspective, I think the big change is that you get financial auditors auditing first as a limited assurance and a reasonable assurance way organizations in fields what they're not used to. These are not numbers, a lot of processes, policies, actions, targets, a lot of things what the auditor has to be aware of. And one of the ministry people who were responsible to adapt the law for Hungary said that if you get an auditor coming alone, fire him, because CSRD can't be audited alone, because you have the financial person, the financial auditor, experience with it, who is the main person who is leading the audit, but he needs people who understand carbon footprint, who understand health and safety issues, who understand environmental issues, governance issues, and because otherwise you can't assure, the audit. And with reasonable assurance, people who are in financial audit, they know that reasonable assurance means that you as an auditor are liable. This is going to change, because now you're making an audit. Of course, you are liable, but not in a sense what a financial auditor is currently liable when he's doing a reasonable assurance. And this is coming with CSRD to the field. But as we said in the beginning, it's a multidisciplinary field. So there are a lot of things happening, a lot of fields, a lot of people have to talk different languages and have to somehow find the same discussion points. I think this will be huge for coming years. And this is also coming outside of Europe with ISSB and many other adaptations. We see them popping up everywhere from Turkey to Brazil. And China is even moving in this direction. India has the BRSR, which is also coming. And I think from audit point of view, this will be the next level.
Wow. I want to thank you very much for your time and talent and treasure and wisdom you've shared. And I wish you the best as you go out, continue to do this great work. Thanks so much.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Val.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks again to our guests for coming on the show to discuss EHS audits. Here are my top key takeaways from the discussion. 1. EHS and ESG audits are a team sport. They require a multidisciplinary approach that accounts for local and regional regulations, local culture, and different areas of expertise. Typically, one person's expertise is not enough to accommodate the nuanced understanding needed. 2. This is a great opportunity for the EHS professional to drive change in global business beyond simply compliance with regulatory requirements. Efforts to do the right thing can reap huge benefits and have a ripple effect down supply chains. 3. The role of an auditor is that of an educator and a helper. They're not there to punish organizations, but instead to identify opportunities and then help them leverage those opportunities. Collaboration and transparency with an auditor can reap benefits from an EHS perspective and lead to better business outcomes. Thanks again for joining us on this episode of Rethinking EHS. We'd like to thank our exceptional guests for sharing their expertise. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. For more tools and tips on how to work globally with a local lens, check out the Global Resources page on the Inogen Alliance website to access webinars, downloads, ebooks, and more. Find the link to the show notes or visit www.inogenalliance.com/resources. Follow Inogen Alliance on LinkedIn for the latest updates. And until next time, let's innovate, inspire, and rethink EHS together.